ऐसी भक्त स्वामी प्रपात की जय। ओम विष्णुपाद परम परम डिवाइन की श्री भक्त सिद्धांत सरस्वती महाराज की अनंत कोट वैष्णव भक्तवृंद की नामाचार्य हृदय ठाकुर की प्रेम से कहो जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद की श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गो गोपीनाथ श्याम राधा की गोवर्धन की वृंदावन मथुरा धाम की नवदीप मया धाम की गंगा मैया की यमुना मैया की तुलसी देवी की भक्ति देवी की निताय गौर प्रयोग all glories to assembled Lord Hare Krishna, all glories to assembled Hare Krishna, all glories to assembled Hare Krishna, all glories to Krishna Guru and Guru Hare Krishna.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. So this is English class. So we are discussing from chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita and text 4. It is on. So we will recite and then we will discuss this particular verse. So इसको ऊपर करना थोड़ा सा word by word. Okay. So, yadā hi na indriya-artheṣu na karmasu anuṣajjate sarva-saṅkalpa-sannyāsī yoga-ārūḍhaḥ tadā ucyate. Yadā hi nendriyā-artheṣu na karmasu anuṣajjate sarva-saṅkalpa-sannyāsī yogārūḍhas tadocyate. Yadā hi nendriyā-artheṣu na karmasu anuṣajjate sarva-saṅkalpa-sannyāsī yogārūḍhas tadocyate. Yadā hi indriya-artheṣu na karmasu anuṣajjate sarva-saṅkalpa-sannyāsī yogārūḍhas tadocyate. sarva-saṅkalpa-sannyāsī yogārūḍhas tadocyate. Yadā hi indriya-artheṣu sarva-saṅkalpa-sannyāsī yogārūḍhas tadocyate. Yadā hi indriya-artheṣu na karmasu anuṣajjate sarva-saṅkalpa-sannyāsī yogārūḍhas tadocyate. Anyone else? Mataji? Yadā hi indriya-artheṣu na karmasu anuṣajjate sarva-saṅkalpa-sannyāsī yogārūḍhas tadocyate. Yadā hi indriya-artheṣu na karmasu anuṣajjate sarva-saṅkalpa-sannyāsī yoga-ārūḍhaḥ anuṣajjate sarva-saṅkalpa-sannyāsī yogā-ārūḍhas. Anyone else? Okay. So we do word by word. Yadā, when, he, certainly, na, not, indriya-artheṣu, in sense gratification, na, never, karmasu, in fruitive activities, anuṣajjate, one necessarily engages, sarva-saṅkalpa, of all material desires, sannyāsī, renouncer, yoga-ārūḍhaḥ, elevated in yoga, tadā, at that time, ucyate, it is said to be. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Abhay Charanarvind Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. A person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. Please repeat after me. A person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. Purport: when a person is fully engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, he is pleased in himself, and thus he is no longer engaged in sense gratification or in fruitive activities. Otherwise, one must be engaged in sense gratification, since one cannot live without engagement. Without Kṛṣṇa consciousness, one must be always seeking self-centered or extended selfish activities. But a Kṛṣṇa conscious person can do everything for the satisfaction of Kṛṣṇa and thereby be perfectly detached from sense gratification. One who has no such realization must mechanically try to escape material desires before being elevated to the top rung of the yoga ladder. Please, we can all say it together. Om ajñānatimirandhasya jñānanjana shalakaya chakshurunmilitam yena tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manoabhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayham Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeyaham Shri Guruho Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Kṛṣṇa Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Kṛṣṇa Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha Namam Vishnu Padaya Kṛṣṇa Prishthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Paricharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschat Deshatarine He Kṛṣṇa Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesh Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastate Tapta Kancana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarubhascha Kripa Sandhove Evacha पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासदि श्री गौर भक्त वृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। यदा हि न indriya-artheṣu न karmasv anuṣajjate sarva-saṅkalpa-sannyāsī yoga-ārūḍhaḥ tadocyate. A person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. So it is said, it is described in Ananda Ramayana that all the Vedic literatures, whether they are the Upanishads, whether the Puranas, whether the Vedas, whether they are the Itihas or Shaddarshans, everything included, A to Z, constitutes but 1 billion verses. And that 1 billion verses are summarized by Lord Kṛṣṇa in his teachings known as the Bhagavad Gita. Thank you. Okay. So in this Bhagavad Gita, out of 700 verses, Lord Kṛṣṇa is speaking around 574. Arjuna speaks around 80, Sanjay around 40, and Dhritarashtra 1. So in this 574 odd verses, Lord Kṛṣṇa has described 1 billion verses, summarized the whole 1 billion verses. And this 700 verses of Bhagavad Gita is divided, as we all know, into 18 chapters. And these 18 chapters are divided into 3 sections. So this 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is the last chapter of the first section of Bhagavad Gita. And these sections, as we all know, are Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. So this 6th chapter is known as Dhyana Yoga or Abhyas Yoga. And we find Prabhupada talks about the yoga ladder in the last sentence of his purport. But before we discuss what Prabhupada has stated in his purport, let's go to chapter 5. Because Bhagavad Gita is such a wonderful scripture that each verse is linked to the next verse or the previous verse. So is each chapter. There's links, and there's a reasons why each verse is spoken in such a way. It's very scientifically. It's very scientific. Now, in the 5th chapter, the link between 5th chapter and the 6th chapter is that in the beginning of 5th chapter, Lord Kṛṣṇa describes Nishkama Karma Yoga, and then Lord Kṛṣṇa describes way to get liberation. And in the middle of 5th chapter, Lord Kṛṣṇa is describing liberation by describing the super soul, being attached to the super soul, and meditating on the super soul. But then, text 27 and 28, Lord Kṛṣṇa tells a different way to Arjuna to get liberated. We have to understand why Bhagavad Gita is spoken. Is obviously for many reasons, but prime reason is for Arjuna to get revitalized, re-understand his duty as a Kshatriya. As a Kshatriya, as a warrior, his dharma or religion or his work is what? Is to protect and to fight and to protect. So Arjuna, at the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, he refuses. He gives 5 reasons to not fight. 4 at the end of in chapter 1, and the 5th one in the beginning of chapter 2. So Lord Kṛṣṇa starts speaking, and this is where the yoga ladder aspect is coming, as Prabhupada describes in his purport. So Lord Kṛṣṇa begins his teachings, and he wants Arjuna And he slowly brings Arjuna from one level to another level to another level, because Arjuna apparently is on the lowest level. And what is the lowest level? What level are we talking about? Prabhupada says the yoga ladder. In the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, Lord Kṛṣṇa describes the yoga ladder. Just like a ladder, there are different rungs on the ladder. So when one wants to go on top of the ladder, one steps on the first rung, moves to the second, like that, moves up. Now, in the Vedic theology, Vedic system, the thought process or the knowledge aspect or the information about God or Kṛṣṇa is also very similarly described. There are different ways to reach the top, or different ways to know the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And what are those ways? These ways constitute the yoga ladder, as Kṛṣṇa describes in the first 6 chapters. And the yoga ladder begins where? At karma-kand. Karma-kand level, karma yoga level, and from then jnana yoga, and then dhyana yoga, and then ultimately the bhakti yoga. So these are the major steps, major rungs of this yoga ladder. And Lord Kṛṣṇa, first of all, talks to Arjuna about on the karma-kand level. And chapter 2, verse 30-31 or so, when he talks about going to the heavenly planets, because that's what karma-kand process does, go to the heavenly planets. So then slowly, Lord Kṛṣṇa talks about karma yoga, and karma yoga has 2 sections, sakam karma yoga and nishkam karma yoga. Sakam karma yoga means fruitive activities. So, and then from there, jnana yoga and dhyana yoga. And this 6th chapter is all about dhyana yoga. The second last you can say, the second last rung of the ladder. And in chapter 5, Lord Kṛṣṇa gives a prelude what's going to happen in chapter 6. In chapter 5, Lord Kṛṣṇa just mentions in 2 verses, 27 and 28, what this yoga, what is dhyana yoga, and he encourages Arjuna to practice this, to control his mind and senses, because apparently Arjuna was not in control of his senses and the mind, because when he saw his relatives in opposing faction, in opposing side of the army, he became very sentimental. He lost his reasoning, thought of reasoning, and then he decided not to fight. And the whole purpose of Bhagavad Gita is to make Arjuna understand. Arjuna means all of us. Arjuna understood it already. It was put in such a condition. But this Bhagavad Gita is for all of us to understand what is our duty, and etc., etc. And this verse talks about fruitive activities and sense gratification. So, text 27-28 on the 5th chapter, which is prelude to the current chapter, it says, shutting out all external sense objects, keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the 2 eyebrows, suspending the inward and outward breaths within the nostrils, and thus controlling the mind, senses, and intelligence. The transcendentalist, aiming at liberation, becomes free from desire, fear, and anger. One who is always in this state is certainly liberated, because in chapter 5, main topic is liberation. But this liberation doesn't happen unless and until one's heart is purified. And thus, heart becomes purified through nishkam karma yoga. And that's what is described in the beginning of chapter 5. And here also, Lord Kṛṣṇa describes that, and Prabhupada mentions that in his purports. So chapter 6 begins. Now, since we only at text 4, quickly, briefly, we will remind ourselves what are the first three texts, what Lord Kṛṣṇa said. In the first text of this chapter, Lord Kṛṣṇa talked about doing one's duty. Not that if one becomes a sannyasi, a jnani, that one stops doing one's duty. And he says, one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as is obligated and is in the renounced order of life. So this is the definition of what is sannyasi, what is a renounced order of life. Sannyasis, from a varnashram point of view, from an external point of view, they wear different dress to a grasta, to a vanprastha, and immediately they recognized that individual is a sannyasi. And each varna and each ashram has a definition, has qualities by which they're recognized. There are external qualities and there are internal qualities. And here, Lord Kṛṣṇa is talking about the internal qualities of a sannyasi. And this internal quality can apply to any and every varna. It can apply to or ashram. It can apply to whole varnashram system. One can have a grahastha sannyasi. One can have a brahmachari sannyasi. One can have a vanprastha sannyasi. It's not that one has to be on a particular status. Yes, according to varnashram, it is necessary, but the internal process, ultimately, Kṛṣṇa consciousness is an internal process. There's externals as well, but internally is the most important factor. And this internal process is what Kṛṣṇa is talking about here. And he is a true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. So that's the definition of a sannyasi, and Prabhupada talks about big purport on that. And then the second chapter, Lord Kṛṣṇa talks about what is sannyas and what is yoga. Yoga, as we know, it means to link up, yujjate, to link up to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and different types of yogas, and all meant to link up to the Supreme Lord. But Kṛṣṇa says renunciation or sannyas is equivalent to yoga. Whether one is doing bhakti yoga, karma yoga, or nishkama karma yoga, whatever type of yoga as mentioned here, if one does that, that is equivalent to being a sannyasi. That's what this chapter, first text second is saying. And then text third, before we come to the current text third talks about ārūḍhaḥ and yoga-ārūḍhaḥ stage. There are two stages in this yoga ladder: the beginning stage and the end stage. Yoga-ārūḍhaḥ is the last stage, and the beginning stage, ārūḍhaḥ. And when we talk about yoga ladder, as yoga ladder we mentioned earlier, but there's another yoga ladder called in the Ashtanga yoga system, and that this Dhyana yoga is about Ashtanga yoga system. And in this Ashtanga, the 8 forms or 8 limbs of this yoga, and we all know that. We have yam, niyam, asana, pranayam, pratyahara, dharana, dhyan, and samadhi. That's also a yoga ladder within that Ashtanga yoga system. So there are two ways of going from the bottom to the top. One is a mechanical way. That's what Ashtanga yoga is. That's what Dhyana yoga is, and that's what other forms of yoga are, whether it's karma yoga, jnana yoga, or Dhyana yoga. Or other method of reaching to the top is described in text 4, which is today's text. What it says, a person who is said to be on elevated in yoga, so right at the highest level. When? Two things. Having renounced all material desires. Number one. Number two, he neither acts for sense gratification. 3, nor engages in fruitive activities. So, we all want to be right at the top of the yoga ladder. Not the dhyana yoga, but the last rung of the ladder is bhakti yoga. So how to reach the top, on top of the ladder. Lord Kṛṣṇa is describing here. Anyone who is not attached to material, who doesn't have material desires, one who is not acting for sense gratification, thirdly, one is not after fruitive activities. 3 things to reach to the top. It's easy said than done. It's very easy to read, very easy to kind of talk about, but it's very difficult to do. And this is where Lord Kṛṣṇa describes the other method. We find many, in fact, a lot of the instructions, a lot of the statements Lord Kṛṣṇa makes, Arjun keeps quiet because he's meditating. Is that applying to me? Can I do this? Is it applicable to me? Is it practical? And when we read Bhagavad Gita, some of us think, oh, it's not for me. I can't do this. It's very difficult. To control the mind in 2nd chapter, control the senses, it's very difficult. But it's not impossible. We find. So the other method is what is known as getting, and Prabhupada talks about in all his purports, and the beauty and the uniqueness of Srila Prabhupada's purports, right from the beginning to the end, whether it's in Bhagavad Gita or in Bhagavatam or other purports Prabhupada gives, he starts from the top. Lord Kṛṣṇa is starting from the bottom and moving slowly upwards. Prabhupada starts from the top. Right? He only talks about bhakti yoga and nothing else. Devotional service. So, great advantage. We are so fortunate that we don't have to start at the bottom of the yoga ladder. Coming to Kṛṣṇa consciousness, practicing Kṛṣṇa consciousness, we are right at the top of this yoga ladder. Why? Because Prabhupada gave us that authority, gave us that start, platform to go straight to the top. We don't have to go through different rungs of the yoga ladder. We just catapulted, go right to the top. And that's the beauty of practicing Kṛṣṇa consciousness. And Prabhupada says in his purport, now let's look at his purport. When a person is fully engaged in transcendental loving service, he is pleased in himself. Susukham kartum avvayam in 9.2 of the Bhagavad Gita. Yayatma suprasidati in Bhagavatam. Evam prasana manaso in Bhagavatam. That this is, okay, when somebody can ask, what is how do we know we are progressing in spiritual life? I'm chanting for so many years, I attend the morning program, I do my service, I associate with the devotees, I do everything. But how do I know I'm progressing or not? There are markers. Just like you see a map, if you want to go from A to Z, you open the map and you follow the direction of the map, or on the Google, on your mobile. And on the way, you will see on this corner, there is this temple, in this corner, there's a post office. So there are markers, indicators. It shows that you're making progress to go and reach your destination. Right? So similarly, there are indicators, there are markers on the path of devotional service. And we should be aware of them, and we should know what they are to see whether we're progressing or not. It's very easy to fool somebody, to show somebody, I'm such a great devotee. You know, the other person will say, oh, he's such a wonderful devotee. But internally, as said, spiritual life ultimately is an internal process. It's between you and Kṛṣṇa. We can fool others, we can fool the whole world, we can fool ourselves, but we can't fool Kṛṣṇa. See? So therefore, there are indicators, there are markers, how much we're progressing. Obviously our guru is there, our Diksha Guru and Siksha Gurus, they tell us. I'm not talking about that. Those are also our guides. But ourselves, if you want to find out what are the markers, 3 markers are here. Throughout the Bhagavad Gita, 3 indicators are there. Krishna's always pointing out indicators. 3 indicators are there. One has renounced material desires. He neither acts for sense gratification nor for fruitive activities. That's the indicator. So we ourselves know how much we are practicing these things. How far we're progressing in the path of devotional service. Here Prabhupada says, he is pleased in himself. Susukam kartum avyam. One symptom, one benefit of practicing Kṛṣṇa consciousness, are we satisfied? Are we pleased? Are we content in our life? Amidst all the turbulence of life. That's the indicator. How much our mind is being controlled by the process we are following and how much we're taking it seriously. Yayatha mam prapadante tam steva bhajamayam. The more we practice, the more we will progress. Practicing is one thing, showing off to somebody else is second thing, but the most important is how sincerely we are practicing it by. And it is the sincerity that will be the driving factor, that will take us forward in our spiritual life. So, coming back, he's pleased in himself. So that's an indicator for us to remember. Are we getting pleased? Are we becoming happy? Or after coming to Kṛṣṇa consciousness, we become more displeased, we become more morose, we become more depressed. So, and thus he no longer engages in sense gratification, Prabhupada says, or in fruitive activities. So, sense gratification, fruitive activities, what are those? We all know, sakam, fruitive activities, as I said, karma yoga is divided into 2 sections, sakam karma yoga and nishkam karma yoga. Sakam karma yoga is the fruitive activities. In a simple language, what is the difference between sakam karma yoga or fruitive activities, nishkam karma yoga and bhakti yoga? In very simple language. Fruitive activity means I do something, I'm attached to doing that. I'm attached to the process. I'm attached to the work. I like doing this particular work, so I also am attached to the result of that work. So I'm attached both ways. Attached to the work, attached to the result of the work. That's fruitive activities. Attached means it's for me. The result, the result of that activity, I will enjoy. It is for me alone, no one else. That's fruitive activities. So whatever we do, we can see, we can define, are we performing fruitive activity or not? Am I attached to the work? What I like, what I'm doing? Am I also attached to the result of that work? And is it only for me? Nishkam karma yoga. That's what Lord Kṛṣṇa and in the previous verses and Prabhupada talks about, especially the early stages of the yoga ladder. One must perform Nishkam Karma Yoga because Nishkam Karma Yoga purifies the heart. Unless the heart is purified, unless there's a purification takes place of the heart, then it is very difficult to progress further on the path of any yoga, especially bhakti yoga. So what is Nishkam Karma Yoga? Let's go back to that example. There's two things, the work and the result of the work. So Sakam Karma Yoga or fruitive activity means I'm attached to the work as well as attached to the result of the work. Nishkam Karma Yoga means I'm attached to the work, but I'm not attached to the result of that work. So who benefits of the result of the work? That result is offered to Kṛṣṇa. That work is offered to Kṛṣṇa. And the pinnacle or the climax of Nishkam Karma Yoga we find in Bhagavad Gita, Yad Karoshi, Yad Ashnoshi, Yad Dadasi, Jahoshi, Yad. Whatever you do, performing activities, you do that for me, Kṛṣṇa is saying. That's Nishkam Karma Yoga. I'm attached to my work, but I'm offering my results to Kṛṣṇa. By doing this, we get purified. And that is very important, especially in the early stages of the yoga ladder. But when one reaches this stage, as this verse is describing, the topmost stage, that is Bhakti Yoga. And how do we see that in that example? I'm still doing my work, I'm still getting the result of my work, but I'm attached to neither one of them. I'm not attached to my work, I'm not attached to the result of my work. So who benefits? I offer that result, the benefits of the result to Kṛṣṇa, and whatever I'm told to do, I do. I don't choose what work I do. I do whatever. In this case, Arjuna is very lucky. Kṛṣṇa is telling him directly to do this. And so we do that through the process of devotional service, through the authorized bona fide parampara, through our guides, our teachers, our gurus. So that's Bhakti Yoga. So Sakam Karma, fruitive activities, Nishkam Karma, and Bhakti Yoga. So three different aspects. And this verse is talking about Bhakti Yoga, right at the top end of the yoga ladder. And sense gratification. Sense gratification, I was listening to the class earlier. Sri Nidhi Prabhu, I think, he was giving class, wonderful class. And towards the end of his class, he talked about the sense objects, vishays. So these vishays are, as we know, are attached, or sense objects is sound, touch, form, taste and smell. So sense gratification, our senses are attracted to sound, taste, smell, form, and touch. So, but Lord Kṛṣṇa describes this earlier in chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita, very scientifically. He says, Dhyato Vishayan Pumsa Sangasteshu Upajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kama Kamat Krodha Vijayate. What is he saying? While contemplating the objects of senses. The objects of senses are five we just talked about: sound, touch, form, taste, smell. We can go into detail with each one, but we don't have time for that. And we're just talking about summary version. So if we concentrate, if we meditate on these sense objects, then we develop attachment for them. And then from such attachment, great longing or lust develops. We really want that. Especially if we see something, if we hear something, if we taste something, the innate desire, longing to get that, that's called lust. And when that is not fulfilled, what happens? Anger arises. If we don't get what we want, it's like a little child, gets angry. So we also become angry if we don't get what satisfy my senses. And after anger arises, krodad bhavati sammoha. After anger becomes bewilderment, delusion. When we get angry, we get deluded. Samohat smriti vibhrama. And from delusion, bewilderment of memory. When we become delusion, we don't know who we are, what we're doing, where we are, where we're coming from. And smriti bhramshad buddhi nasho. And when memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost. Vinash kale viprit buddhi. Intelligence is lost. And when what happens? Buddhi nashat pranashyati. When intelligence is lost, one falls down to the material pool. One falls down to the lowest level of material existence. That's the danger of sense gratification, concentrating on the sense objects. So what is the process? Ras param drishtva nivartate. In 259 Bhagavad Gita, Lord Kṛṣṇa talks about developing a higher taste. Because here, Prabhupada is saying, otherwise one must be engaged in sense gratification. Since one cannot live without engagement. If we are not in the top ladder, if we're not in the top stage as what this is talking about, if we have material desires, if we hanker for sense gratification, and if we engage in fruitive activities, whether we are or not, the senses must be engaged. Both ways, engagement has to be there. Not that a sannyasi or a viragi or a jnani thinks that once he reaches that particular perfection in that level, he has nothing to do. No, that is not the case. Senses must be engaged all the time. And then, how to engage the senses? In bhakti yoga, in devotional service, in Kṛṣṇa consciousness. That's what Prabhupada says. He says, one must always, without Kṛṣṇa consciousness, one must always be seeking self-centered sense gratification, fruitive activities, or extended selfish activities for me, my family, for my community, for my nation. That's extended selfish activities. If one is not convinced of what the process one follows, if one doesn't progress in that process one is following, this division of our energy, our intelligence is divided to do other activities. And Prabhupada says, but a Kṛṣṇa consciousness person, a person who is performing devotional service, can do everything for the satisfaction of Kṛṣṇa. They work, and the result of the work is offered to Kṛṣṇa. That's Bhakti Yoga. And that is a secret. Early on, Prabhupada said that is a secret of success. And that is our goal. Whatever level we may be, our goal is to reach top of the yoga ladder, the yoga-ārūḍhaḥ stage. And in that stage, it happens slowly. That's why there's a ladder. Kṛṣṇa doesn't say, there's no ladder and you go right to the top. Very few individuals can do that. Because they've gone through the previous rungs of the ladder in previous lives. Anyone coming to Kṛṣṇa consciousness, they go right to the top. But those who not, they have to go slowly. One who has no such realization must mechanically try to escape material desires, sense gratification, fruitive activities, control the mind. And what is the mechanical process? Dhyana yoga, Ashtanga yoga, that what will be described in this chapter. That's what Kṛṣṇa will say. And he will describe all that mechanical process. See, Arjuna is listening. He is not saying anything. He is keeping quiet. And now and then, he he asks a question, and after Kṛṣṇa describes this mechanical process to control the mind, why to control the mind? The mind is center of the senses. Right? If you control the mind, the senses are controlled. If the mind is controlled, then the intelligence is controlled. If intelligence is controlled, one doesn't take part in fruitive activities. So mind control the mind is paramount. The first step in spiritual advancement is to control the mind. So after describing all these yoga ladders, different rungs of the ladder, Arjuna says, karma yoga, dhyana yoga, jnana yoga, ashtanga yoga, Arjuna says is not possible. He says, chanchalam hi manha Kṛṣṇa paramati balvadridam tasya ham nigraham manne vayo eva sudushkaram. He says for the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong. To subdue it, O Kṛṣṇa, I think is more difficult than controlling the wind. And Kṛṣṇa agrees, Lord Kṛṣṇa agrees in the next text. He says, yes, ashamshahe mahabaho. He says, manodu nigram chalam. Yes, Arjuna, you're right. The mind, to control the flickering mind is extremely difficult. But he gives a solution. What is the solution? Abhyasena tu kontya vairagyacha griyate. By constant practice, not just any practice, but suitable practice, and by detachment, mind can be controlled. If the mind is controlled, one can easily come to the top of the yoga ladder, yoga-ārūḍhaḥ stage. That's what text 4 is talking about. And what is that suitable practice? It's very simple. That suitable practice is very much prescribed for us by Srila Prabhupada and previous acharyas. Chanting, association, reading, service, morning program, like that. That is what is known as sadhana bhakti. That is a suitable practice. And what is the detachment? The vairagyacha griyate, Lord Kṛṣṇa is talking about. We are to be always alert that whatever is pratikul, unfavorable to that sadhana practice, we avoid. Either by through our intelligence or by with somebody's guidance. We avoid that. So we only anukulasya sankalpa pratikulasya varjanam. That's what suitable practice and vairagya is. So we adapt whatever is favorable to the process of sadhana bhakti, and we reject what is unfavorable to the practice of sadhana bhakti. If we do that, then we can come to the highest stage of this yoga ladder, and by which we can renounce all of our material desires. We will not act for sense gratification, and we will be above fruitive activities, as this particular verse is talking about. It's coming to 7 o'clock, a few minutes left. I think I'll stop here. I'll welcome some comments and questions or corrections if somebody has. There are a lot more points to be made, obviously, but we don't have enough time to do that. Okay, if not, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Kṛṣṇa Balaram ki jai, Shri Radha Shyam Sundar Lalita Vishaka Devi ki jai, Shri Shigo Nitai ki jai, Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Samavet Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Jai Gaur Premanand.